If your world was to be annihilated by an alien race and you were given the opportunity to restore life to the dying planet to save your loved ones, the entire human race, and everything in between, would you do it? Of course you would. But what about if there was nothing to save on your world? Would you bother? Would you spend your last lonely hours enjoying life as much as you could instead of saving the world to, well, live all by your lonely self anyway, jerking off in a corner? That's a question for the overthinkers, but today the question on my mind relates to indie puzzle platformer Seed of Life. Is it any good? Let's find out. Welcome to the broadcast. My name is Naj and this is my review for Seed of Life, available now on Steam. A big thank you to publisher Leonardo Interactive for providing me with a code for this review. Massively appreciated. So what's it all about? Well, I'm glad you asked. Developed by MadLight Studios, Seed of Life is their first video game attempt. The development team is also made up of a grand total of 2 people, which is always an impressive feat. How 2 people can create any kind of video game always blows my mind, so smarter than I could ever hope to be. The game was in beta phase throughout July and was launched as a full game on 11th of August this year, link in the description below to the store, if this review somehow piques your interest.
This object on the wall seems to hold a pedal. What if... the object is reacting! I can take it!
Uh-oh... But remember, this is all just my opinion and I would love to know yours. Let me know in the comments below. And if you like the video, click that subscribe button so you are kept up to date with all my upcoming videos. Seed of Life sees you play as Cora, a young girl who resides in her grandpa's cabin in the world of Lumia, a beautifully lush planet on the brink of annihilation, under siege by an alien race known as Nemurian. After reminiscing of stories told by her grandpa about a seed of life, an otherworldly artifact capable of replenishing life, Cora sets out on an adventure to find this mysterious seed and save her planet from impending destruction. It is easy to see what Seed of Life sets out to do, to give players a unique world, one full of engaging puzzles, platforming, and a story packed with emotional depth and intrigue. But, unfortunately, despite its valiant attempts and pools of fun splashed throughout, Seed of Life falls short on many of its promises. Looking like what I imagine a Fable game would have looked like if one were to have launched on last-gen consoles, the game is pretty to look at and has a decent Fable-esque look to it with its character models and world design. As you venture through this world, most of what you come across are jungles and vegetative landscapes high on mountain cliffs. At times, the world can look gorgeous from a distance as the sunset beams across the landscapes, through the strange otherworldly plants and vegetation throughout the land. Cliff and rock formations in the distance look like they belong on a postcard if there was an intergalactic tourist service desk on the planet. However, like a lot of tourist attractions, get too close and you start to see why the locals can't understand why their town is your favourite holiday destination. It can look rough just as much as it can look pretty. The game takes place in a small variety of sandboxes as you discover the way to the Seed of Life, and each of these areas, despite the game being out of beta testing, feels like it is currently in beta testing. Whilst the game runs pretty well with the occasional stutter and visual blemishes, the audio in this game is pretty terrible. Music tracks from different areas or world states, whether you are safe or in danger, change abruptly between each other. There were multiple times in which the track would change suddenly and it could be really jarring and pull you out of the game.
Let's do this!
A couple of times in my playthrough, Cora's dialogue would overlap with her talking from 2 different pieces of dialogue at one time. I mean, I speak fast sometimes, but I didn't think it was possible to speak so fast you talk over yourself. Being from a small development team though, there are going to be visual and audio glitches in the game, which will likely be patched out down the road, and these are not what I want to focus on with this video. Instead, it is the actual game design that gives this game the feeling it is in beta phase, and ultimately, an incomplete game. The objective of the game is to collect 6 cores for your talisman, power-ups which give Cora abilities she can use to traverse the harsh landscapes with a fighting chance of reaching the seed. Her trivial pursuit board of a talisman is a powerful tool, having ties to a people known as the Ancients, and too powerful for the average Joe to wield, therefore sparking the notion that not everything is what it seems with Cora and our objective. A pretty interesting premise. The game does start off quite slow as I felt to be held back by Cora's constant inner monologue and tutorials. It constantly stops you in your tracks to teach you the ropes, and this isn't out of the ordinary for games, and it wouldn't have been so bad had the character and dialogue been compelling. But both the writing and delivery of the script are just felt to be so mundane, which didn't help the already expositional dialogue being, to be honest, a bit of a bore.
Darkness is spreading everywhere, and it feels like Lumia is screaming. I'm all alone, and I'm scared. No, I need to stay focused and positive. I can change things.
However, once the character shuts up and lets you get on with it, the game opens up and my initial impressions were getting better once we left the starting area. It gave me the illusion I could go anywhere, solve puzzles in different orders, traverse the world in my own way. Accompanied by Nor, a Normoranian, a race connected to the destruction of Lumia and the Talisman, you are guided through the wildlands with two goals. Collect the 6 cores for the Talisman, and as much Lumium as possible. Lumium is a magical life source you obtain through these Lumian binds, and it is used to power the Talisman, giving fuel to your abilities. Each plant you come across will add to your total Lumian capacity, allowing you to increase the length of time powers can be used. A big part of the game will be to seek these out, as the further you progress, the longer duration on your abilities you will need to traverse the map. You can locate these with your first power up, a vision ability that allows you to see objectives and points of interest in your surroundings. Go to the yellow beam for additional Lumium, or go to the red beam for additional health at the expense of your Lumium. The first time you are out in the big wide world, it is the hardest the game will be. Limited health and Lumium whilst you are trying to learn the ropes. I died a number of times trying to figure out where to go and how the mechanics work, and it felt like the game is going to take on a Metroidvania style approach, with areas being inaccessible without certain abilities. However, it never really came to that and falls into the word I used earlier, illusion. Despite the open looking sandboxes, there is only ever really 1 or 2 ways to go about your journey, and most of the time it is laid out clearly before you. After 1 to 2 hours I realised this was the case, and this is where my time with the Seed of Life started to show its reluctance to bloom. Seed of Life is a puzzle game without any real puzzles. A puzzleless puzzle platformer, attempting to make the traversal of the world a puzzle within itself, but unfortunately unpolished mechanics and gimmicky skill and level design make it a tough cookie to bite into that it never really reaches the potential it has at being a decent puzzle platformer. Manoeuvring through the world can feel quite fiddly and restrictive. Outside of your abilities you can jump, and you will need to be doing this quite a bit to get up cliff sides. Korra has one of the most feeble jumps I have seen in a platformer and makes traversing simple ledges or getting out of water onto a low ledge a real pain in the arse when it shouldn't be. There are a range of abilities to unlock in the game, some more useful than others. Self-healing for when you are near the heat of flaming lava, the power to produce light in dark caves, to the ability to sprint across the lands followed by the polar opposite of Korra's regular jump. Once you have unlocked an ability, it will generally be that ability you need to use for the next section of gameplay to get to the next ability, but the game rarely allows you to think for yourself when using the abilities, and most of the time it feels like a walk through the same old parks, just with a newer pair of sneakers on. But be careful not to ruin those sneakers by stepping in dog shit. When attempting to explore, don't tread too far off the beaten path, especially early on in the game, because you will tread in that dog shit and die. Go too far and it will be made clear that you are not supposed to go to that place yet, as either the air becomes unbreathable, or you just simply cannot make certain jumps. This would have been absolutely fine if you had to put a bit of work into it, if you had to locate the powers and discover which ones allowed you to go where, but it all had a very linear feel to it and there was no sense of rewarding exploration. With the areas you can explore, you will be faced with either one of 2 foes. These huge plant worm looking creatures that will drain your life should you end up in their gaze.
We call them scanners.
And these little cuties, Numeranians, that aren't so cute once you get up close to them. They will grapple you and drain your life, and your only defense is to mash Y on the Xbox controller to break free from their grasps. Once you realise you should not be approaching these things, they are easily avoidable. There is no combat in the game to dispose of them, but stay out of their red ring of death and you will be fine. I only came across these foes I think 3 times in the whole playthrough, so they are not very prominent, but it added a little variety when they were present. That being said, with the ease of manoeuvring around them, I found upgrading your life at the sacrifice of Luranium to be quite pointless, because every other death in the game was pretty much insta-kill. So there's no difference between having 100 or 200 life. Your path will occasionally be blocked by these force-field barriers where the switch is usually on the opposite side of the barrier, presenting you with a predicament. Many times though, I would just use my sprint skill to jump over a rock skipping the barrier, or walk a few extra meters to the right and just go around it. Honestly, I couldn't tell sometimes if I was completing these puzzles the correct way, and they were just so easy to the point of walking around a wall or a boulder to get to the switch being the solution, or whether I was finding flaws in their design, not completing the challenges in the way I was required to, and I was just finding loopholes in the world and gameplay. It made for some very simplistic gameplay loops and felt like I was cheesing it without knowing if I actually was. The most difficult parts for me were not due to the complexity or smart game design, but to the lack of polish in the gameplay tools at my disposal. Falling to my death because the sprint jump went out of control, falling from a ledge as I climbed down a mountainside because it wasn't clear if I was on the right trail or not. And sometimes I would just feel like I was skipping an entire section of puzzle platforming because I could just fall to the bottom whilst bouncing off walls to survive. The mechanics felt like an abundance of ingredients thrown into a stew, but once dinner time hits, you realise someone forgot to put the stove on. The ideas are good, but the implementation into the sandbox could have been more polished and, afraid to say it, more creative. This is evident in later sections of the game. Seed of Life shines when it encourages you to use multiple abilities from the talisman at one time to traverse a puzzle. For instance, using the vision ability to see hidden platforms, whilst using the sprint ability to run across them, followed by a jump to a magnetised cube to get to the top of a mountain peak. Fiddly, but it was these moments when everything came together. It is just a shame these moments are few and far between. Some abilities I wasn't required to use more than 2 times in the game, such as the lighting ability and manipulation ability, the latter of which you acquire near the end of the game to use in a final puzzle, which kind of felt like it was just shoved on the end to fill the 6th talisman slot. The only puzzles that I would call traditional puzzles that weren't to do with some form of platforming were the ones you have to complete when obtaining a new ability. When shutting down a force field barrier, you obtain a petal, devices used to obtain new abilities at their shrines. You have to turn 3 dials to create a shape to reveal the core, and they only take a few seconds to solve, nothing that is going to blow your mind. So how long will you be doing all this? The game only took me around 4 hours to complete. In that time, the story and gameplay mechanics only really started to build up and engage me in the final 30 to 60 minutes or so. Once I was required to use multiple skills to progress and the story began to unfold, I found myself having a good time. The story began to pull me in with its core themes on the preservation of life and raising questions about our existence. It all showed great promise and I was getting really into it, and then the game ended. No climactic revelations, no brain-taxing final puzzle or boss. You simply complete the game, but the worst thing about this is the potential it lays out to you in the form of sequel bait, and I was indeed the big fish, taking that bait, hook, line and sinker. I was just suddenly left craving more. I wanted to know what was going on, who was doing what this meant, what that meant, how was this gonna continue, but it just swept the rug from under me and I was just left in my own filth. I won't spoil the specifics, but the game ends with Cora and Na asking half a dozen questions that pose interesting answers, but you don't get any of them. The most interesting concepts for this world are teased, then pulled straight back in, ready to be dished out in the inevitable sequel instead, as the story raises more questions than it does answers. Well, Nor sums it up perfectly, to be honest.
There is not enough time to explain. I will tell you more later.
Wow! All of this sounds so exciting!
This ultimately led me to believe the true purpose of this game was to beta test the idea, and if successful, we will then get the true Seed of Life experience, which has great promise. It's just a shame this game felt a little like a wasted opportunity in order to set and test the foundations of what is to come. And let me tell you something, once I finished the game, I realised something. Other than these little cretins that look like one of those light bulb fishes bonked a toad, there is no life on the planet. It's all gone, so who are we trying to save this planet for, and what is the point? Will the potential restoration of life bring back actual living beings? I don't know, but I guess for now, back to that lonely sticky corner I go.